Hello, welcome everybody. Thank you all for joining. It's great to have you here on our webinar From Risk to Resilience, Building Compliant Cyber Secure Critical Infrastructure Across Energy Systems. So thanks everyone for joining. I'm Katie Rance, Senior Business Development Manager at NCC Group, and I'm delighted to be joined here today by some great individuals on my virtual panel. So we have Sean Arrowsmith, Director of Industrials at NCC Group, Ray Robinson, Director of OT for NCC Group, Liz Conboy, Executive Director at RenewableUK, and finally Stephen Agnew, Head of Policy at RenewableUK. So to set the scene on what you can expect during the next hour or so, we're going to be exploring how approaching safety, risk management and cybersecurity can help energy organisations build true resilience across complex operational environments. So as I said, I'm delighted to be joined by some real experts here today, especially from Renewable UK. So thank you, Liz and Stephen, for agreeing to support us with this webinar. So they are from Renewable UK, who are the voice of the UK's renewable energy industry. And they represent and support close to 500 companies scanning the full supply chain of the sector. And we've been working with the membership body for just over a year. So I'm sure Liz and Stephen will share an industry-wide perspective on cyber resilience and risk management. And as I said, it's great to have you both with us today. For those of you on the call that aren't too familiar with NCC Group, we are a global leading pure play cybersecurity and managed service business. We're working with a number of clients within the energy sector, including renewable energy organisations, supporting the water sector, utility companies, grid connectors, offshore, onshore wind projects, battery energy storage facilities, etc. Not only are we working with operators, but we're also supporting the supply chain as we see cyber requirements flow down. I'm sure compliance is likely to come up a few times during the next hour, and this is where we're really supporting our clients. We're seeing a lot of changes coming through from the energy regulator, where we are actively supporting our clients to kind of mitigate those challenges. And we're also supporting from an assurance perspective too. And I'm sure a few examples of where we're helping our clients will come up throughout our discussions. Stephen, I think I'll come to you both first, if that's okay. But it'd be great if you could share your perspective on the biggest shift or challenge that you're seeing within the energy sector today when it comes to managing both cyber risk and resilience, but also health and safety. I think that's a massive part of this sector as well. So yeah, it'd be great to get your insights, please.
Oh, thank you very much. And a massive thanks to NCC Group for inviting Renewable UK to be part of this conversation. We're also really delighted to have you as members, and it could be that we've got a good amount of member companies on the call as well. Security is a leading priority for Renewable UK across 26 and beyond, and the current context geopolitical position has brought that conversation to the absolute forefront. What I would say is that we're seeing a really important connection between energy security and national security. It's something that we're hearing a lot, and it doesn't. I sometimes think maybe it's just because I work in energy, but I can't seem to open a newspaper or turn on the radio at the moment and not hear a conversation about energy security. So now is the time to be having these conversations and considering what they mean for our organisations as well as the kind of wider economy and for the UK. One of the real shifts that we've seen is that health and safety and cybersecurity and resilience, our members aren't seeing them as separate disciplines anymore. They are becoming more and more tightly interconnected. And in an energy system which is increasingly digitalised, and our members are really embracing that transition, cyber risk is safety risk. And real resilience is about a true integration of the two. And I would say the things that are driving that change are, firstly, an increased digitalisation of energy infrastructure. And in the clean power space, that is, we are moving at the fastest pace, I would say. We are designing and building projects from scratch. whilst also looking at the increased optimization of current assets. And we work predominantly in wind, both onshore and offshore, and also in that brave new space of floating offshore wind. We're seeing the rapid growth of smart grids, remote monitoring, and also the more and more use of AI optimization. OT is increasingly connected to IT, but I will let Ray talk about that. But all of that means that there are more entry points in terms of cyber threats into the system, and so our organisations recognise the importance of getting this right. And that is in the context of an evolving threat landscape as well. It is recognised, and we were really pleased to host the second edition of our cyber and security seminar a couple of weeks ago, and NCC supported us on that. We had some great speakers from National Cybersecurity Centre, from RUSI, and they spoke the true rise in state-backed cyber activity and the central place and the central target that energy infrastructure has in that. So our members see themselves as being at the real front of this conversation and this battle and this responsibility, I would say. So, yeah, in the context of that, these two pieces are moving closer together. And what we are trying to do is support our members to be ready, to be aware, and not to avoid looking at this space, because it's a bit scary and it's new territory for a lot of them, especially some of our smaller members. At that point, I'll perhaps pass over to Stephen, who can perhaps talk a bit more about the work we're doing in the security space, Stephen.
Yeah, no, happy to do that, Liz. We launched at the beginning of March a new report called New Threats and New Tools, and new being the theme here. What was new about that is we were working with the Royal United Services Institute. You know, this is a new partnership for us. We're used to working with energy consultancies, planning companies, various environmental NGOs, etc. This is a new step for us, recognizing that security is an ever important issue. And indeed, whilst the report was in train from sort of autumn last year, publishing as we did just after the beginning of the war in Ukraine or in Iran, was very timely. And what we did was we war gamed 3 scenarios, including two cyber attacks, one on a large offshore wind farm, one on a gas terminal, and really looked at how resilient we were as a country, what our security measures looked like, what our processes and protocols looked like, and how we thought it would hold up. I suppose the good news is we're quite resilient from an energy perspective. One single attack wouldn't significantly undermine our energy infrastructure. But as we know, in the cyber space, there's going to be multiple attacks potentially between cyber and indeed physical security attacks, culminating on major impacts. One of the conclusions of the report then was we needed to move from a situation of energy security, which we have, to one of national security and our energy infrastructure being a crucial part of that. So it looked at the fact that for oil and gas, because one of the strengths of renewables is it's distributed, taking out one, even the largest offshore wind farm, is relatively easy, manageable for the system. But that has meant that we're not actually part of the national security conversation. So whilst the oil and gas sector have protocols with government and clear reporting mechanisms, we don't quite yet have that for the renewable sector. So that was one of the key takeaways from that report. But I suppose to end in the positive in this part was it would take one missile from an aggressor to take out a gas power plant. It would take 40 missiles to take out an offshore wind farm at 5 million euros a pop. That's an expensive attack. So, again, the conclusion was renewables absolutely make us more secure, but we absolutely need to improve how we become part of the government's response. Just touching briefly then on the cyber conference, I think a real takeaway from that was 200% rise cyber attacks in 2024 on energy infrastructure. So this, is an increasing priority, and I think somebody put it, really well. Cybersecurity is no longer sitting in the corner; it's now centre stage, and I think that's, as an industry, something we need to populate throughout our membership. And I'm sure I'll touch on that a bit more detail later. But yeah, that's what we're seeing. The kind of change we're seeing, and the other kind of key focus was the lessons learned from Poland. I mean, I was shocked at how. One of the things was they had all the right systems, they just weren't using them. So default passwords weren't changed, no multi-factor authentication. I have to say, for years I've hated multi-factor authentication. Now I'm like, right, if that's what we need to stop, to protect our systems, it's definitely a price worth paying. So I'll maybe stop there in the kind of intro comments, but I'm sure I'll get into some of those issues in a bit more detail later. Thanks.
Perfect. Thanks, Liz and Stephen. It's great to have your insight from what you're seeing from a Renewable UK perspective. Sean, Ray, I'll come to you next. In terms of kind of what we're seeing from an NCC Group perspective and the sort of client conversations we're having, and Ray, what you're seeing from an OT side of things would be great. Sean, I don't know if you want to go first.
Yeah, look, we work with a kind of broad spectrum of and shapes of sizes of operators within the energy sector. So we're seeing different challenges across different segments of the sector. If you look at the larger operators that we work with, they've been on a cyber maturity journey for some time. So they're heavily financially regulated by Ofgems to go and drive those improvements in cyber, and they're on a path to compliance with the kind of principles around the NIS directive that came out in 2018, and it's all about driving compliance with the cyber assessment framework, the CAF, on enhanced profile and into advanced profile over the next 5 years to 2031. So we see quite a degree of maturity in those organisations, and they have slightly different challenges, I guess, to different operators within the market, because they're larger organisations with a lot of legacy infrastructure. They got huge amounts of technical debt around OT infrastructure and out-of-date technology that they have to manage as an organisation, and they're going on that kind of modernisation process and journey to make sure that it's future-proofed. They're also looking at the next 20 to 30 years of operation as well, and those sort of timescales when you're operating in the transmission or distribution side of the energy market. That you've got to future-proof your substation infrastructure and things in terms of going forwards. I'm going to guess some of the challenges we've already touched on. The geopolitical situation is obviously bringing things up the agenda, because attacks are coming on critical infrastructure, and it seems an obvious place to look. Within renewables, we work with a range of operators there, from large to small. But one observation I will into that is that some of the smaller operators that are coming into the market to build new facilities and installations, they don't necessarily have dedicated cyber resource. The challenge there is actually how do they tackle the requirements from a cybersecurity perspective and get ahead of the regulations. Often the danger there is to see cyber as not too relevant and a bit of a tick box approach results as a result of that. So that's quite a dangerous thing, Steve. So what I would say is for those organisations, really focus on taking the opportunity to build cyber in from the outset and tackle some of the challenges, and assume that you will at some stage come into regulation from Ofgem. So it makes sense for you to future-proof your operations in that way to make sure that you're going to be addressing the requirements that will be coming over time. I think that those are sort of key areas for us and what we observe across the market. And like I said, the more mature organisations are already on that journey, on that path in driving cyber resilience. But they've got big teams of 50, 100 plus people to do this, and some of the smaller operators just don't have that capability and expertise. It can be a bit daunting, but I do think if you treat it in a sensible way and use an industry framework to drive those cyber improvements, then you can put some structure around it and make some real ground in terms of cyber maturity and uplift and everything else. So yeah, challenges there. The Poland thing was interesting. Stephen's already touched on that. They had invested in the right infrastructure, the right tooling, but they just hadn't necessarily done some of the basic things that allowed some of the success of those attacks as well. But yeah, it's an ever increasing threat, I would say, in terms of anyone in running critical infrastructure where there's an interface between physical and cyber. Really need to be looking at security. That the intelligence agencies in the US have just recently published in the last week or so a paper around how the Iranians are actively targeting cyber physical systems, so PLCs and SCADA systems, because they can make a physical impact from a remote perspective by using cyber techniques. So it's something that is going to increase in challenge as we go through whatever the next few years brings in terms of the current administration in the US. Anyway, I'll pause at that point and hand over to Ray to get his contacts.
Thanks for that, Sean. Yeah, some of the things that we're seeing, both in large and also smaller operators, when it comes to what I'd call cyber hygiene, a lot of companies, I'd say the majority that we work with at the moment, are quite poor on their physical estate. And I'll explain what I mean by that. So let's say a lot of the sites, whether they're renewables, they're remote sites, or whether it's quite a large energy company, a lot of the physical sites that house the network and information systems is a lot of times it's outsourced to another company to manage the actual physical presence that's on site. And what you'll be used to is if you go to site, there's a very strong safety sort of hygiene. I've been to some sites where you can take 40 minutes going through a sort of a safety thing, knowing where you need to go if there's an alarm, knowing what you need to do if a certain event happens. But in most instances, it doesn't include a cyber hygiene overlay on it as well. A lot of the attacks that we've seen are, when I say attacks, incidents, I'd say, are in a lot of cases not even Russia or China or Iran, even though they are doing that. It's sometimes just insider hygiene. And I'll give an example. It might be supplier A has come to site to do a feature update. All the racks look exactly the same. They've gone through the safety assessment. They know what they need to do. They take out the USB stick. They plug it into the wrong server because they're all Dell. They all look the same. And suddenly they've got malware that they've taken from their home because it's not a separate workstation. And suddenly there's malware in the infrastructure, not only on their machines, but also on other vendors' machines as well. And because there isn't a lot of discipline in some of the areas about this is what you should do when you come to site from a cyber point of view, this is what we then need to do here. And so working with that can be an actual challenge, because how do we change that? And a lot of times on the larger companies, a lot of times that we've seen, it involves going to work representatives. It's sometimes unions that you have to work with to actually get that practice embedded in the same way that the safety practices have been embedded over decades. And that's one of the things that we're seeing as challenges. We're breaking through that at the moment with training packages, engaging with companies at a high level, but also the operational teams as well, because sometimes that particular responsibility doesn't sit with, say, a CISO. It might be with the operational team and so on. With doing that. So that's one of the things that we're seeing from a practical level of getting that sort of cyber hygiene. And that's the same for renewables. If, for instance, a company needs to go to site and so on, that sort of hygiene of safety is normally there. Go there, sign that register, make sure you've got the right PPE, have you got this sort of gloves, so on and so forth. All of that is sort of baked in the system. But how you do a patch for the system and so on is normally not in existence. And that can actually have issues even in resilience as well. So just touching on resilience, some of the things that we're seeing as well is when the design of systems. It could be safety systems, for example, that are designed in certain ways where resilience isn't thought about systemically. So within, for instance, our company, we have a company inside Adelard who do a cyber-informed safety. They'll look at things like code, safety cases, and so on, where we look at how can cyber impact the actual safety or the safe operation of a particular site. In particular instances, and not just on the safety point, where we've looked at resilience. I'll give an example. We've had where we've gone to a site facility where they said, right, if that system goes down, don't worry, we've got that backup system which will come in and provide a safe operation of the site. And we said, okay. And then they said, well, and if that one goes down, we've even got triple resilience. And when we've gone to actually look at the resiliency of that, we found things like, right, each of those systems are all pointing to the same, let's say, time sync server. And we've seen it where the time sync server goes down and all the triple resiliency of each of those have now been compromised because they're single points of failure. So how do we look at that and solve that? Is, again, just like with, I mentioned with the safety culture and trying to work with the IT team, the cyber team, but also your operations team, is looking at when things are going to be commissioned or built, how do we then look at all of those single points of failure to ensure that if that system goes down, it really is a resilient system. It's not depending on something which have failed in the first system as well. So that's some of the things that we're working with clients on to mix the sort of safety, the health and safety, as I've mentioned, and the cyber risk across systems which are thought to be resilient but might not be if an event occurs as well. So.
Thank you. That's really insightful from all of our panelists. So a lot of information there, lots of different perspectives, but super interesting. So thank you. Moving on then to the second question that we have. So building on the previous question and discussion we've just had, how do you see the energy sector's approach to resilience evolve over the next few years? And what do you think organisations need to prioritise to keep pace? So Liz, I'll come to you first, if that's okay.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Katie. You know, I certainly wouldn't claim to be the technical expert on this call, but I think what we can speak to is perhaps that word pace, which I think is a really important part of this question. So I think, as a lot of people on the call would recognise, we are under pressure to really deploy at pace. We've been set a very high target and a high bar by the government on the CP 2030 roadmap. But in energy, we can't afford to move fast and break things. And in fact, I often find myself quoting Secretary of State Ed Miliband and his kind of rallying call to move fast and build things. So we are on a real fast pace in terms of the renewable energy sector, partly aided by the annual auction round cycle that we find ourselves in, particularly for off and onshore wind. But what that means is that in the digitally integrated energy system, that should help us to move faster, to reduce overruns, to control costs, to drive optimization of existing assets. So that's all really good stuff. But what our members recognise is that as they are increasing this digital capability, it absolutely has to be matched with strong cyber resilience at the same time, as we've talked about already, in a very complex landscape. And I think the other hugely important part of this puzzle is securing that investor confidence. And that's something that we are seeing our members really attune to when they are out there looking for speaking to the investment community and kind of the different kind of financial instruments that are needed at the different points of a project. The cyber compliance and resilience of those projects, those plans, those business cases is incredibly important to securing that investor confidence. So we're seeing these conversations now being had at the highest level, and I would say in our membership it's recognised as a challenge for the real leaders of these organisations, whereas perhaps in the past the individuals at NCC Group would have found themselves working with would have been real specialists in these areas. I think that still exists, but it is now recognised that the responsibility does sit at the boardroom level in terms of in not just managing the hygiene, as Ray puts it, of your own projects, but actually being able to deploy at pace and to achieve the renewable ambitions that we've got as the UK. So we're seeing it sitting at board level, with board level ownership, a drive for cross-functional collaboration, so between the engineering departments. We're quite a traditional sector in many ways. You know, a lot of the people who work in this space are engineers, and you look at the kind of feat and spectacle of these projects that we're building out in the North Sea. And if you think about Dogger Bank as an example, I know NCC are working on that project. It's, you know, it's quite incredible what it is that we're building out there in terms of the physical assets, and, you know, these turbines that are the size of the Shard, and it's going to be, you know, the biggest offshore wind farm in Europe. The physicality of it is incredible, but it's absolutely underpinned by this cyber resilience, if you think about how interconnected we are as projects across Europe. So you need that cross-functional collaboration. That's a cultural thing as well, actually getting people and organisations to think in a different way. That's really important. It's it's an investment in technology and people at the same time, you know, making sure you're bringing in the right people with the right level of expertise, but also you are doing that. Everybody in the organisation has a responsibility to that. So what kind of investment are we making in that training and that development? And then scenario planning, you know, is really interesting when you talk to some of our board members, for example, who are finding themselves doing much more like scenario-based stress testing of all of their health and safety, including cyber. And so they are having that quite intense, scary experience in a worst case scenario, but in a very safe environment, and thinking about what those lessons are and how they can learn from them. So, you know, those are some of the bits that we're picking up. But this PACE terminology, I think, is really relevant to how we're trying to operate, but in a responsible way.
Amazing, thank you, Liz. And I think your comment around investor confidence is a really interesting one too. I'm seeing that across the market as well. Cybersecurity is not just becoming something that is just needed for day-to-day operations. It's almost, you know, investors are looking at and having those conversations really early on. You know, what's your cyber strategy? How are you going to mitigate against risks, etc.? So yeah, investor confidence is a huge one that I'm seeing as well, especially with my clients. So yeah, Stephen, it'd be great to get your insight.
Yeah, I suppose another thing that kind of reflected on after our cyber and security conference was, I thought it was quite a harsh quote, but the more I think about it, the more it makes sense that, you know, if you're a victim of a successful cyber attack, you're not actually a victim, you're negligent. And as I say, it felt really harsh, but actually it was, you made the reference to how security and health and safety have to tie in. If you know, if there's a health and safety accident, you know, and you're culpable, and it's the same with cybersecurity. And what sort of drew out from that was the fact that throughout our companies, you know, where does that responsibility then sit? If we have that responsibility to ensure we're cyber secure, who's responsible? Is it the manufacturer of the equipment? Is it the owner and operator? Is it the people who do the operations and maintenance? And I think the point was really that actually it's all of those, and they have to work together. And I think that's, you know, a bit like I said before, we need to work better with government security systems. I think we need to also coordinate better across the different parts of the supply chain, and indeed with the security forces. And that's you know, this increased collaboration we're having with security experts. You know, that is some of the feedback we're getting. We need to be feeding back the data that we're seeing on the attempted cyber attacks. You know, we need to be engaging with the likes of the Navy. You know, there are expertise in the offshore wind sector that actually don't exist in the Navy, and vice versa. You know, we have different skills. So it's that really working with new partners that in the past we've been unfamiliar with, and as I say, we are increasing that collaboration. But there's learnings coming from that, and you know, we're sort of implementing that as we progress.
Amazing, thank you. Sean, I'll come to you next if that's all right.
Well, it's good to hear that context from Liz and Stephen in terms of they're also seeing that boards are sitting up and looking at this in the right way, and that's really encouraging. And I guess also that the investment community are kind of leaning into the fact that cyber is a critical part of new operators having to get themselves safe and resilient in the market, and that's also a good thing. The one thing I will say in terms of over the next few years, the regulation and the energy regulator in particular is very proactive, driving change within the sector. I've already talked about the main operators of essential services and the large distribution and transmission businesses are already on that journey, but it's only a matter of time before this moves more and more into even smaller operators within the energy market around renewables and things. And that cumulative effect of you may have a 20 megawatt onshore installation, but when you've got 10 of those, it starts to cumulatively build up, and then the regulator's certainly going to start pushing more stringent cyber requirements into that side of the market. One thing to think about as well also is that it's not just about you as an operator, it's your whole ecosystem. So you need to think about supply chain, and pretty much every cyber attack of recent years across Marks and Spencers and other sectors and everywhere else, many of those have come from a supplier or a third party risk, which has introduced that breach into that organization. So really think about how you're going to flow down your requirements and cyber requirements into your supply chain. So if you're an onshore wind organization and you're using BESS to battery energy storage to do that, you need to look at those suppliers and those operators to make sure that they're also meeting some of the cyber requirements that you need to flow down into it as well. The other thing to think about, and Liz touched on this actually, is really important point, is that kind of cultural element of driving cyber resilience into organizations. And we get this a lot where we because cyber is moving out of just IT into the engineering world and the cyber physical side of things, you really need to embrace that kind of cultural bridge across from IT into OT and engineering and things. And engineers need to sort of come on board in terms of accepting that they have a cybersecurity consideration as part of their duties. I mean, we're fortunate at NCC where we have a team in Ray's team who are all come from a kind of engineering background. They speak the language of that community, and that's really helpful. And then alongside that, we have safety capability as well. So between us, we have cyber, safety, and engineering, which is a great combination to help drive some of those changes and keep pace. The thing I'd say is, it may seem quite daunting again, but with all these things, start with the basics, get the basic hygiene right. I think one of our audience members talked about operational security processes and procedures. Make sure you get those practices in, get your kind of supply chain assessment methodology in place and an approach, and make sure you look at things in a holistic fashion. We'll just see more and more effort in terms of driving secure by design as well. The one opportunity I think for new operators coming into the energy market, and particularly in renewables, is you have the opportunity to actually build security in from the outset. You don't have massive technical debt like the traditional operators and legacy operators in the market. So take that opportunity to really build in security from the outset and secure by design. Build in secure architecture, use the Purdue model to give you that defense in depth, and think about things like protected monitoring, not just on your sort of entry point within your technology estate, but also deeper into the network, deep protected monitoring around that to look for signs of cyber intrusion, and use sensible frameworks to implement that kind of cybersecurity requirements over time as well. I'll pass over to Ray at that point. So those are my thoughts anyway.
Thanks. I'm going to touch on a bit more about secure by design, and in particular for the supply chain who are supplying to various companies, and for those companies, what they're looking to do in the future, but not fully yet from what I'm seeing. And this is a little tip I'm going to give for also how you can build this in so that you can get this costed into your plans as well. Because a lot of times we will ask for for doing things more cyber secure and so on, but a lot of times you don't have the mechanisms to do it. And I'm going to explain what I mean by that. So typically, and I'm just going to put a blanket over the various industries. So whether you're battery energy storage, solar, wind, so on and so forth, there is a normal stages that you go through. And I'm going to say this very generic, but you'll get what I'm saying as I go through. There are generic stages of planning that you are used to already. Right. So, for example, you'll do a feasibility study, and that will be costed and it will be given out to suppliers to go and do a feasibility study. You'll then do a feed study, a front end design study, and so on and so forth. And these are mechanisms that are known within the construction of these facilities. So, within the feasibility studies, there might be things environmental, like is there and I don't know if this animal exists, but I'll make it up. Is there a yellow spotted toad within that particular environment? If there is, right, we can't build there. What's the water sources? Might have poisoned the water source. All of these things because this is what you do before you build it. You do this in your feasibility study. You will then look at things like, what telecoms can run there? Can I get telecoms to the site? Do I need to engage with Starlink, or can I get Vodafone or BT or other providers that I haven't mentioned, exponentially and so on, and to help me connecting? You do all these feasibilities as part of what you do now, or generally you do this. And then you'll do a front-end design. Typically, what's not in this pre-planning is the cybersecurity element as a costed element for you to do. So one of the tips I would suggest is where you get an RFP, an RFI, or whatever it might be called, to do this, and you're going to bid for this work, always ask, will this include looking at the cybersecurity elements, cybersecurity by design? There's been a lot of times I've gone to site and systems have been put in place which are insecure by design. Or let's say, for argument's sake, I need to put a network switch in, but because you're not thinking about the future that this needs to be monitored, it doesn't have a spam port in. And then if you don't understand what that means, it's just something which would enable us at a later stage to be able to monitor the environment for security breaches later on. Because that is not part of that pre-assessment before you build the site, and sometimes these can take 5 years and so on. It's normally over the years. You are building a site which ends up being insecure by design. And then what happens is a company like ours will come along and we will say, this is easy to break into, right? Because that hasn't been thought. So in the supply chain, one of the things I would suggest that you push back to companies if they don't have this is to say, I don't see the cybersecurity requirements. I see the bits about the environment. I see the bits about safety. I see the bits about building regs. I don't see the cybersecurity. Would you like us to consider that? And what that will do is it will enable you to attract more funding to put that in to your design and build that in by design. What we're working with a lot of the companies is to those ones which are not as mature, is to help them do that as part of the supply chain, part of the procurement process. We're getting there, but if you're in the supply chain and you don't see that coming through in your initial feasibility studies, your feed studies, and so on, or similar, depending on the industry, I would suggest as a tip that you actually push that back, because or add that, because when you design that facility and it goes into operation, the key thing, as you all know, each site has to generate a certain amount of income and a certain amount of money. And if an attacker is able to take out the facility, so you're not earning £20,000 a week, £50,000 a week, or so on, that's what you need to build in secure by design. Thank you.
Thanks, Ray. I didn't think that yellow spotted toads were going to come up on this webinar today, but that surprised me. No, but completely get what you're saying, and I think also it's worth noting as well. We mentioned about operators and the supply chain, and we're also working with suppliers within the supply chain and helping them with their assurance and being able to help them provide evidence. So when the operator needs certain evidence or is asking for cybersecurity strategy, etc., as part of that procurement process, we have obviously been helping with suppliers and product developers as well to be able to assure that their products are cyber secure. Perfect. Conor, that was a really insightful discussion. So I think there will be a second poll now coming through on the screen, which is going to ask, which area do you feel your organisation is least prepared for when it comes to building end-to-end resilience? Managing cyber risk across IT, OT, meeting regulatory or compliance expectations, responding effectively to operational or cyber incidents. So that should be on your screen now, if you're able to answer that question. And then moving on to the third and final question for our panel. So what piece of advice would you give to energy organisations looking to strengthen their resilience strategy over the next 12 to 24 months? I think we've mentioned a couple of things, and Ray, you've given some great tips along the way. But yeah, it'd just be great to get everybody's thoughts and insight. So Stephen, I'll come to you first, if that's okay.
Yeah, thanks, Katie. Sean's already touched on this, but I think maybe building it out a bit is really just making cybersecurity everyday business within your business. You know, I'm a technophobe. I'm never going to be the expert in our team, but you know, our systems, every company's systems need to be embedded throughout the team. It's no longer, back to what I was saying before, it's no longer just the IT guy. It needs to be, everyone has to have at least the basic level of awareness, working with your cybersecurity company on that kind of proportionate level of training for the team, and then make sure, you know, where incidents, attempts are taking place and spotted, making sure they're getting reported up, and, you know, that there is clear reporting lines so that you know, this has been something that's been monitored by the board and responded to, and it has that high level of oversight. So yeah, I think that's it, really, making it everyone's business, but, you know, pitching it at a level that even people like me can understand.
Perfect, thank you. And I think we're definitely seeing, you know, as we mentioned earlier, it's definitely becoming more of a board conversation and being taken seriously. But I completely agree, Stephen. It's about making it everyone's kind of problem, if you like. So yeah, Liz, I'll come to you next, please.
Thanks, Katie. Yeah, I mean, I would just add to that, you know, resilience really starts with understanding. It's like any of these things, knowledge is power. So I would say bringing in an independent third-party perspective, I know for us as an organisation, has been hugely valuable, because they will ask the big open questions that you don't realise what you're not asking yourself when you are working in a space that isn't your core business. I agree with Stephen, it's no longer niche or a technical issue, it's a real leadership responsibility as well. So yeah, building the awareness and capacity at all levels is hugely important. I think it's really it's a really key thing for when I think about the value chain that we see represented in the just under 500 member companies. I think some organisations know and see this stuff quite clearly, and some are just their awareness is building. And if you think about the change in legislation that we've had over the last 24 months and where that responsibility is sitting within the supply chain, I would say for some of our members, they're just scratching the surface of what this means for them as a business and how it's going to impact the tender opportunities that they're responding to and so on. So it's for us, it's really equipping every point in the value chain, but also then for some of our larger members who are procuring a real range of services at point of you know, when they're developing their projects, it's that recognition that resilience is only really as strong as your weakest link. So understanding where that sits all the way down through your supply chain relationships, I think is really important. So from our perspectives of Renewable UK, we aren't the technical experts, but we do see our responsibility of equipping our members with the information and the relationships that they need. So third parties like NCC Group are a really good starting point.
Thanks, Liz. And I didn't pay Liz to say that, so clarity. Well, Sean, I'll come to you next if that's okay.
Well, just picking up on one point that Liz made, it would be remiss of me not to plug our cyber policy radar that got released yesterday in terms of staying ahead of legislation. So that report basically looks at cyber regulations across the globe that are relevant, particularly in terms of CNI and things. So I would encourage you to go and download a copy of that, because it's a really great document that keeps you ahead of that regulatory side of things. So I guess I agree with Ray on the secure by design bit, but I'm going to say if I have to pick one thing, and this applies to IT and OT and everything else, but it's drilling incident response and understanding that if you do get attacked, how do you handle it, and how do you minimize the impact of that attack? How do you contain it? How do you understand it? And how, if you can control it as effectively as possible, its damage limitation. And the other thing is about how do you communicate to the outside world? It's all those kind of incident response processes, roles and responsibilities from the board down, to understand that within the organization, because if something does happen, you see the variation and difference between a well-handled incident versus one that isn't handled well. And there's lots of examples out there of some incidents almost fly under the radar because they have been contained and dealt with in such an elegant way that they're newsworthy, but they don't stay in the news. And then there's others where the outside communication is so terrible, it's just up there all the time. So I would say just document but also drill your incident response processes and procedures to make sure everybody, when something does happen, knows exactly what they're doing. Because I can tell you when it does happen, the pressure is you just cannot really understand the level of pressure you'll be under when it happens. So that's mine. Thanks.
Thanks, Sean. I think that's a very good piece of advice. And in terms of the policy radar, I think on a couple of slides time, there'll be a QR code where you can download the latest edition of our cyber policy radar and a few other interesting pieces of collateral, and a link to the report that Stephen mentioned earlier that Renewable UK published back in March. So that will be coming up on your screen shortly. But before that, Ray, I'll come to you next, please.
Yeah, and just very quick before I answer, a quick plug for me as well. I'll be at Cyber UK next week supporting one of our customers. I can name them, Scottish Power, where we'll be talking about what we're doing with them. They've asked us to do it on their behalf, and some of the assurances that we're doing within that supply chain as well. So if, again, you supplying to Scottish Power or looking to, and you want to understand some of the things that we're doing there and what might actually impact you, just come along, have a chat. It's going to be like a one-to-one, so you can talk to me directly, and I can then sort of give you some advice and that sort of stuff for free. For that point. So the thing I would mention, I'm just going to expand on what Steve mentioned. So Steve said cybersecurity should be everyone's responsibility, which is correct. But one of the things I want to expand on, choose at least one person to take that ownership. And normally, if you're doing that already, you're very good. You're in that top 20%. If you're not, and you ask that question internally, that's when you'll see, oh, hang on, we probably aren't secure at all. Who actually is going to lead on all these things? So that's one of the things I would mention, is that within your organization, if you're in the supply chain in particular, make it one person's responsibility that they are to deliver the cybersecurity elements. It might mean that you need to get that person trained up, sent on various courses, go along with different people to get the experience. We can help with that side of thing, with mentoring as well, so that person, and obviously they'll be supported by the rest of the company, can actually help to implement a lot of these things, like what Sean's mentioned, incident response. If something happens, we don't want to be in the situation of companies I won't mention where your operations are out for months. Yeah. So that's the thing I would say that you should definitely look at. So.
Great. Thanks, Ray. And yeah, I think just as another thing, NCC Group have got a stand at Cyber UK. So anybody on the webinar that's attending, I believe Sean will be there too, and that we do have a stand. So feel free to come past, and there may even be some physical copies of the Cyber Policy Radar, some nice shiny copies to get your hands on. So there's going to be one final poll on your screen now, which is going to be around, after today's discussion, which area are you most likely to prioritise within your organisation over the next 12 months? And there's some options on your screen now to go to. Please don't forget you've got the question box to submit any questions you want to ask our panellists. And as mentioned, there are some great pieces of collateral on screen now that you can later download or register. So I've mentioned the Global Policy Radar, but we've also got a compliance framework document that you can download, which is a great, as Sean said at one point, around kind of choosing a framework and kind of going with that. There's a kind of self questionnaire that you can fill in to help you. And then we also have some case studies that you can download and read in your own time around how we are helping to secure the energy infrastructure. So let me see if there are any questions in our in the box. Right, so we've got one question. Recent development, and Sean and Ray, I'll probably come to you on this one, and then Liz or Stephen, it'd be great to just get your insight on this one. But recent developments at Anthropic have highlighted both the power and unpredictability of advanced AI. In the energy sector, where resilience is mission critical, how do we balance rapid AI adoption with the need to maintain cyber resilience across OT and IT systems? Ray, do you want to start with that one?
Yep. Sorry, I was just finding my thing. Yeah. So one of the things to look at, and I'm sorry, I'm going to have to just say this, is getting experts who can actually look at the resilience of your company before adopting AI to give you more insight, metrics, and so on and so forth. Because it's the same as nuclear, isn't it? You can use it for a bomb, or you can use it to supply energy, and it's the same with AI. Once you introduce that into your environment, it's what can that do? Where can it go? Are your actual is your company designed with the right zones, conduits to actually stop an attack if it starts as well? So the main thing here is get expert help to actually help you if you're looking to actually adopt that. I mean, a lot of our industry, the energy, renewables, we do have a lot of legacy systems at the moment. A lot of those are controlled, contained. In some instances, the technology is that old. I've seen infrastructure where there is malware on that infrastructure, but because it's so old, the malware wasn't designed to actually attack that old infrastructure. So they're actually secure in that sense. And rather than getting rid of that malware, it's looking at at the point we will upgrade and do that. So the main thing I would say for this particular one is bringing people to get expert help so that they can actually tell you if you're adopting a new technology, what potential impacts or risks it will pose within your actual environment. We do something called the facilities due diligence, where we go into a facility, have a look at that, look at what controls you've got, look at what you probably would need to put in as one of the services that we offer. Yeah, thank you.
Sean, do you want to add anything from your side?
Yeah, not much more to add to Ray's points. Obviously, AI is bringing massive benefits in terms of efficiency. We're using it from a defensive perspective to build efficiency and automation into our security operations that we provide for customers, because it just makes absolute sense to do that. For those that aren't sort of familiar with the Anthropic thing, it was a closed group of companies called, it was a Project Glasswing, and they were using it for offensive security against all the large scale software providers in North America, so Microsoft, AWS, all of those types of organizations, and giving the AI the ability to go off and find security issues within the code. And it found a lot of kind of zero-day stuff. It did have full access to the actual source code itself, so it's like full access to be able to do that kind of study. So it did have that sort of advantage of being given access to absolutely everything. It is quite a worrying thing, but we're doing a briefing actually as NCC later today on that topic. But like Ray said, AI can be used for good or bad. It's also can be used in a defensive capability as much as an offensive one that it was used for in that context. So don't sort of shy away from embracing the benefits of the advancement in technology that we get from AI. There are going to be things like this where news stories break around the use of it in an offensive capability, but that's technology evolution over time. But there's so many benefits. It's still use it safely and engage people that understand it, and give you that advice and guidance to put the guardrails around the use of it to make sure it's done in a safe way. Thanks.
Thanks, Sean. Liz, I don't know if you have anything to add very quickly, and then I'll wrap up.
Yeah, thanks, Katie. I'll keep it quick. I think one of the ways that we're seeing AI being really adopted and considered is that real future energy system view about, for us, a really successful future energy system isn't one that prioritizes just one technology. It's about orchestrating a combination of them. So, renewables, nuclear, the gas bridging for a certain amount of time. Obviously our endeavor is that it becomes as renewable based as possible moving forward, because it's genuinely the best price option when you compare it to future gas. But what we see is that digital innovation is really the glue to building that system. We've done a pretty good job of scaling renewables, but you need a very resilient system to wrap around it. And we think about the work of NESO in this regard. We're seeing AI being used for real-time system optimization, AI-driven forecasting. I mean, it's quite incredible around like wind demand pricing, smart grids, automated responses, and also then the maximization of existing assets, not just how we consider building new ones. We talk a lot more about repowering and actually getting as much as we can around things like life extension. AI has a really mega and exciting role to play there, but I think, a really salient advice here about, and Ray's comment and comparison to how nuclear might be used for better or worse is a really powerful one. So make sure that you're doing it in the right way. But the future seems to be a one in which we embrace AI, but let's do it carefully and with consideration.
Perfect. Thanks, Liz. Thank you. And thanks everyone for joining us today. Conscious we're very close to the top of the hour. We've covered a lot in this session, everything from kind of compliance, investor confidence, talking about physical security, as well as obviously kind of the traditional cybersecurity, secure by design and building cyber in at the very start of projects. We've spoken about the implications of yellow spotted toads and planning permission. It's been a great discussion. A huge thank you to our panel of experts for their amazing insights and examples. And thanks to everybody for jumping on and for all of your engagement throughout the session. And we'll be following up with links to some of the resources from both Renewable UK and NCC Group. Hopefully, Sean and Ray may see a few of you at Cyber UK next week. And if there's anything you'd like to follow up on or have a kind of one-to-one session, then please reach out. Thanks again for your time, and have a great rest of your day. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.